Good afternoon, everybody. For those of you listening to the recording, good evening, good morning, or whatever time of the day it is that you're listening into this presentation. I'm Paul Cliff. I'm Shared Head of Adult Learning and Skills for York and North Yorkshire, and I've had initial responsibility for how both authorities are going to respond to the investment plan and the investment of the Multiply initiative. So if we can move to the next slide, please. Just to give you a sort of run through of the afternoon, this is a Teams live event, which means questions and answers will be in through the Q&A pod, and I'm supported by Anne Featherstone, Assistant Head of Adult Learning at North Yorkshire County Council on this afternoon as we manage this session. So please feel free to put your questions and answers, your questions into there. I'll respond at the end of the presentation to those, and we'll collate those themes and feed those through to me so that I can respond accordingly. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through the background, because I am mindful that not everybody was fully up to speed with what Multiply is or Multiply aims to achieve. So where it's come from, what it looks like. We'll then look at how we, as the two upper authorities in this, have responded to that and submitted our investment plan. How we've determined what the need is for Multiply across the region. We'll then identify the interventions that we've looked at, potential projects that underpin that, and the timelines that we'll be working to in order to implement Multiply for the benefit of the residents of the geographic area that we're dealing with. And we'll then look at some next steps. I won't have all the answers to all the questions at this stage, and that will become a little bit clearer, but we'll answer as many questions as we can today, but we'll also give you those opportunities to file those through after the event. And if you're listening to the recording and didn't have the opportunity, then you'll have the opportunity to send those questions through. So if we go on to the next slide to look at the background of Multiply. So what Multiply aims to achieve is it's an element of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, which is the government's response to the outgoing European social funding interventions. Its aim is to increase the levels of functional numeracy in the UK adult population. 3 key success measures that are expected out of Multiply: more adults achieving maths qualifications, improved labour market outcomes, so more people getting into work, overcoming that barrier to not having a formal maths qualification, and then a general increase in the ability of people to use number in their daily lives and how vital that is, but also about increasing people's confidence in the fact that some of them do, quite a lot of people have significant skills in number, they just don't have a certificate attached to it. And it's to overcome that sort of view that, well, I just don't do maths, as being sort of engendered within UK society, that will overcome that as well through the initiatives. So funding has come in at upper tier authority level, and it's really important to stress that I'm in a holding role with this intervention. This isn't money that's directly coming to the adult learning service of either authority, but we're taking the overall steer in the first stages and responding to it. Across the 3 years of funding for the project, there is £2.6 million worth of funding for North Yorkshire and £741,000 across City of York Authority. We've taken the approach to share some of the backstage services on that, so that more money can go into the direct interventions, which is why I've got that initial holding role in pulling together this particular plan. So if we move on to the next slide, what we're continuing to do is to sort of talk you through the timeline of where we are, because we had to work to a very, very tight timeline on this. So we got the indicative funding allocation in late April. We had to submit our investment plan to detail how we were to spend that money by the 30th of June. But in reality, when you're working in the world of local government, that deadline is much shorter than that, because there are various stages of executive committees that it will need to go to be responsive to local residents and local residents' needs. So in effect, we were working on a timeline of late April to the 15th of May in order to pull this together. So our scope for wider consultation on it was quite limited. However, the requirements of the investment plan were to work at high level anyway. So we've got lots of opportunity as we move forward now to shape how we get involved in what we're wanting to achieve. So we had limited consultation, and thank you to those people that contributed. We had over 20 providers and local government organisations and VCSE organisations who've fed back into that consultation, which helps us to shape where we were and to understand the local provider network for this. And we equally reached out through some of the local representative bodies as well, so that although there were 20 responses in total, some of those were on behalf of multiple organisations. What we had to do was submit that investment plan, as we said, by the 30th of June to the Department for Education, who are managing this element of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. The wider angle of UK Shared Prosperity is being dealt with by the Department for Levelling Up. That investment plan was seen by the DFE as an iterative document, so it was our first approach, and we were to work with them over the period between submitting the investment plan and its acceptance through to September of this year, which is when the money will start to come through. We've had our initial feedback, and the number of questions and clarifications were quite minimal. So we are able to say that this is largely the way that we will be moving forward. There are technicalities around procurement and those type of elements that need to be backstage managed at the moment. But the approach that we're taking is one that certainly chimes with the Department for Education, who are very keen to work with us as a geographic region to do a significant portion of research in the area as well, that will benefit not just maths interventions, but also wider adult learning and skills interventions and wider community interventions as well. So there's lots of possibilities. We had to take some guiding principles. If you consider the geography that we're dealing with and the number of people that we need to influence, 2.7 million plus 741,000 doesn't go very far. So we had to shape some principles around it so that we weren't spreading the jam too thinly, but equally having the maximum amount of impact that we could have. And first and foremost, we needed to make sure that this wasn't a here today, gone tomorrow type of initiative. If we're going to make significant changes in how adults engage in learning, undertake further learning, then there needed to be a sea change. So we needed to utilise the money as much as possible, because this gives us flexibility that isn't necessarily provided through other funding streams, to ensure that we build a legacy, that we build partnerships, that we build collaborations, that we build better ways of working that will enable more impact for wider than just maths. Equally, we identified that individuals who are potentially struggling with the use of maths may also struggle with the use of literacy, and most probably high profile, probably links with digital as well. So those three tend to go hand in hand. So we needed to try and find a way to maximise the outputs. What we were clear on is that the nature of the prospectus, but equally the direction of travel for adult learning funding, is there needs to be able to ways to progress into a wider skills offer than just maths. It was a fundamental principle that we weren't able to displace or replicate anything else that was funded through funding streams, which, when we look at some of the proposed interventions, was a hard thing to manage. So it was important that we took that stance very early. But as I said, it was key. We've got more flexibility with this funding to innovate and to trial approaches that will help us find that golden thread. We know what the skills needs are of the region. It's well documented. Our employers say what the skills needs of the region are, but we know that larger proportions of the adult population do not engage in learning of any form. So this can help us identify what that golden thread is to pull on that will enable more people to engage with adult learning. We want to maximise the opportunities for organisations that are currently not in receipt of skills funding to help us deliver these outcomes. It's fairly important. If we're going to engage with people, we need to engage with more places that people go to. So what we're trying to do with this is spread the funding out along a wider partnership. What we're keen to do is learning in place, not a specific place. And it may well be that barriers have been artificially set up by individuals that mean that they won't step forward into learning institutions. So let's take learning to people, but equally not to a wider range of places. And you'll see through some of the suggested projects that we're looking at how we're going to try and do that. But the final thing that we needed to do was to put together an intervention plan that allows us to spend all of our money in year one. 2.7,741,000 plus over 3 years only happens if we spend our full allocation in year one. If we're not able to do that, then there will be clawback of that funding and there will be reduced allocations. So we needed to find that balance of what can we spend money on quickly to enable us to innovate further in year 2 and year 3. So that's the other element of the background that we put into it. So to move on to the next slide and start to talk about the approach that we took in order to pull together an investment plan as quickly as we needed to. Multiply was based on, almost ironically, some quite simple maths. It's based on the number of people in the York and North Yorkshire area who don't hold a level 3 qualification, making an assumption that those without a level 3 qualification won't have maths. It's a very crude metric, but there's no data either way. And we do know, and there will probably be people on this call who are sitting here thinking, well, I've got a degree and I haven't got maths. There will always be anomalies, but that was the figure we were dealt with. And then based on that number, there was a national funding per head formula applied, and that gave us the funding amount we needed. We then had to prove that we needed that funding. So we were given it. So we were then tasked with saying, and this is why we need it. And then we needed to suggest the best fit from a list of 9 interventions. Thankfully, the 9 interventions were actually 10 interventions, and we were given the opportunity to add an extra one in. So we've had a reasonable amount of flexibility in there. So we had no choice but to go to data. So we looked at NOMIS data, we looked at census data, we looked at other population-specific demographic data to try and get a feel for what is the need for this additional funding. We had to create some opportunity for consultation, but those of you that fed back will know that was quite limited. But as I've said, this is absolutely how we're going to do it. This is a plan that will spread out over year 3, but will certainly change in year 2, and maybe even earlier than that, because we absolutely have to spend the money and we've got the flexibility to be able to do that. We looked at extensive research produced by York and North Yorkshire LEP and other providers as well. We considered, and we needed to, this has to dovetail with the outcomes of the wider UK Shared Prosperity Fund submissions that need to be with DLUC by the end of August. So we needed to make sure that what we were trying to achieve was in line with that. So we've worked quite closely with those undertaking those UK Shared Prosperity bids, both for North Yorkshire and City of York, to make sure that we've got some alignment with that. And then we used other information that was provided to us by the government as part of this process, but also information from the Northern Powerhouse and other providers as well, to try and get us to that position about saying what is this need. So if we move on to the next slide to start to sort of indicate what this shows us about the need in the region. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. And I apologise that these slides are very wordy, but you will get a copy of these sent out with the presentation for you to go through in a greater amount of detail. But initially, you first look at the data across York and North Yorkshire, and it would indicate that actually we are a very well qualified region. We have a higher percentage of individuals with level 4 or above qualifications, never mind level 3 and below. So trying to find that need is challenging. Equally, of the £8.2 million ish of adult learning funding that is spread across providers across the region, 64% of that is currently spent on maths. So we can't duplicate that provision. So those two things immediately said, well, how do we need to start to pull this together? What we've certainly found is that engagement with adult learning across the sector and across almost all providers is skewed quite significantly to those who are over 30 and majority female. So we need to be able to find a way to engage people who are not looking in the direction of adult learning at the moment. Those people below 30 are significantly less likely to engage with learning, but are equally the greatest proportion of individuals who are economically inactive and are ones that will have probably more recently had an education experience as well. So to drag those individuals, and I say drag in the most pleasant terms, nudge is probably the more favourable opportunity, is a clear need for this. The other thing that it was very clear from the data is across the region, we are very good at working with those individuals who are determined to be of disadvantage, whether that be due to economic status, whether that be due to ability disability, whether that be due to substance misuse, whether that be due to criminal justice interventions, whether that be due to a whole range of factors that would probably in other areas of the country be determined as there is a real need to intervene with these individuals. We are very good in this region of providing wraparound support to those individuals, and as a result their outcomes are better than their peers who don't engage. But there's a big caveat with that. Large amounts of that additional intervention has come through European Social Fund funding, which is starting to get switched off as early as October. So we know that our jam within Multiply is thin. The UK Shared Prosperity Fund jam is a larger amount, but still won't go as far as replicating all of those opportunities. So we need to try and find a way of utilising this funding to achieve a small element of that gap. The other thing we are very aware of, and you know, you look at our skills landscape reports, the industrial landscape of the region is on the precipice of change. Greater level of automation, as an example, will significantly affect people in logistics and in warehousing and in manufacturing and some elements of engineering, which are significantly larger chunks of employers. But we've already got unfilled vacancies. So what can we do in the upskill reskill landscape here to prevent us falling off that precipice? But we know we've got massive amount of vacancies already, and we're not necessarily steering people in the right direction of that either. And most importantly, we have a significant proportion of people who are on low wages, with low skills, with low levels of qualification, who are the least likely, not just in North Yorkshire, but across the city of York, but equally wider than that across the whole country, who don't choose to engage with further training. Individuals with lower levels of qualification are less likely to seek more qualifications, and those at higher levels, which we have a higher proportion of in the region, i.e. level 4 and above, are more likely. So we need to find that golden thread. It's really, really important to us. So if we consider that sort of need, how do we match that to potential interventions? So if we move on to the next slide, which will start to indicate those interventions. This slide is small for a number of reasons. One is these are the interventions from the prospectus. And as I've said, the prospectus talks repeatedly about 9 interventions and then gives us a list of 10. And then in addition to that, we have the opportunity to provide our own off-menu intervention. Those highlighted in blue are the ones that we felt as a team writing the initial intervention plan were the ones that best suited the need identified through that previous analysis. We may find, and we have opportunity to, start to undertake some of the other interventions as well. We just because we've not mentioned them in the initial investment plan doesn't mean we can't go back to them. But these are the ones that, if we are going to spend and to spend that money effectively, that we are starting to target. So we will be looking at courses designed to increase confidence with numbers for those needing their first steps towards formal numeracy qualifications. We will, and it's probably one of the biggest opportunities to engage with those with low wages, consider courses designed to help people use numeracy to manage their money. In the middle of a cost of living crisis, something that people feel a real value to engage with might develop confidence and might support them to undertake further training. So we thought that was vital, and that's a key theme that we are trying to run through our investment plan. We're looking at courses aimed at people who can't apply for certain jobs because of lack of numeracy skills, or to encourage people to upskill in numeracy in order to access certain jobs or careers. So possibly to fill some of those skills gaps we've currently got and prevent further skills gaps further down the line. We will be looking at using innovative ways, and the reason that I'm saying innovative is we are needing to look at courses for parents wanting to increase their numeracy skills in order to help their children and therefore help with their progression. We have to be particularly careful with this line because there is a significant line within current community learning funding that funds family learning. So it needs to differentiate from that current family learning offer. We are looking at numeracy activities, courses or provision developed in partnership with community organisations and other partners aimed at engaging those who are the hardest to reach. So those who are not in the labour market or other groups that we determine locally. That's our opportunity to backfill a little bit of that ESF funding that is going to be exiting stage left fairly shortly. And then we're also looking at that opportunity for people who we have got. We've got them on the, we've got them on the learning line. They're engaged in a vocational course at the moment, but by stretching that course to include elements of numeracy might just enable them to progress their careers a bit further. So those are the interventions that we have chosen from that list. So as I said, the ones in black are the ones that we haven't chosen to focus on in year one. So that's innovative numeracy programs delivered together with employers, including courses designed to cover specific numeracy skills required in the workplace. New intensive and flexible numeracy courses targeted at people without level 2 maths, leading to functional skills, because that should be a spin-off, a natural spin-off of this activity. Numeracy courses aimed at prisoners or those recently released from prison or on temporary license. Again, there is wraparound funding already significantly placed within the region that can do that, certainly within year one. And numeracy courses aimed at those 19 or over that are leaving or have just left the care system. Again, not a targeted offer in year one, but there is an opportunity to do that for those organisations who are engaged in there at a risk of losing funding as we move through into actual implementation. So if we start to look, as we move on to the next slide, please, about what the outline projects, we had to detail within the investment plan the types of things that we are looking to do to meet those interventions. And these are top level, but it will be these that will form the theme of the prospectus when we're looking to award projects to individual providers, groups, organisations as we move forward. So the first one we're going forward is this course is designed to increase confidence with numbers for those needing the first steps towards formal numeracy qualifications. There is a suggestion that one of the reasons that people don't engage in training is they haven't got the time to do it. There is no time in their busy lives, within their working lives, to be able to do it. So what we will be looking at creating are micro bite-size provision, 10 to 15 minutes in length tops, building individual skills in numeracy, enabling people to be able to say, oh, well, I did understand that after all, therefore maybe I could go further and learn a bit more. So it's about micro bite size. We will be looking to work with large employers for asking them for a pledge to release people to do 10 or 15 minutes worth of numeracy learning, to give that opportunity for people, in some cases, to be able to overcome shame of not having a formal maths qualification, and they may feel particularly lacking in confidence or particularly self-aware that they haven't got that, but are unwilling to ask to go on formal maths training if they're employed, or some people who just haven't got the time. So that there is this idea that this exists, but it's never been tested. So we're going to try to do that 10 to 15 minute interventions. We're going to link that to regular fun things linked to maths. We know people will engage in something on Facebook where how many ducks are on this picture and you count and you do that's a maths activity, but people will engage with that, but they won't come along to a maths course. So we're going to look at QR codes in places where people are about. So that might be through social media, it might be on the back of tickets, it might be on till receipts, it might be on other regularly used media where people can scan the code, do a maths game, and it has a reveal of, did you realize that was maths? Did you realize that you had that skill? Did you realize with that skill you could go on and do more? So it's an engagement activity. It's developing that sort of analytical thinking that's necessary to progress through maths, but it provides a different avenue. So we'll be looking at that as one of our outline projects. If we can move on to the next slide. As I said, and everybody will be acutely aware, we're in the middle of a cost of living crisis. We're seeing rising costs at all times. There's increasingly likelihood of raised energy bills even further, pushing more and more people to feel the squeeze of the economy. So what we're trying to do is to find a way to use maths so that people feel confident enough to maybe take a little bit of control if it's possible, or to identify that they need further support. So this is where we'll be looking particularly to work with community groups. We'll be looking at particular interventions that will benefit people in the middle of a cost of living crisis. It might be around budgeting. It might be around switching energy providers. It might be about doing things to improve the efficiency of your home and understanding how much that intervention might save you. It might be around meal planning. It might be about a whole range of opportunities, and we will be open to people to come to us with those suggestions about how we can use the real need to support people to back that up with something that's linked to maths that will enable people to gain the most from this multiply intervention. We will be having, and there will be an engagement team that is employed by the authorities to go out and about into supermarkets, into shopping centres, undertaking sort of Martin Lewis style money saving expert roadshows to show people how by the better use of number they might be able to wrestle some control of the situation that they're in. And that will support wider discussion. So we know this will cross over with lots of other interventions, both within the authority and within community groups. So we will want to pull that together and use that multiply funding to go that little bit further to enable us to achieve some of these outcomes. Okay, next slide, please. This one is about courses aimed at people who can't apply for certain jobs because of lack of numeracy skills or perceived lack of numeracy skills, or to encourage people to gain that maths qualification that might be the vital essential on a job that they really want in order to do that. So we're going to be looking at engagement events with those providers who have real links with employers. We'll be looking for employment focused roadshows, engagement events with further education colleges, universities, partners across the Institute of Technology, other representative groups who can come together that show the impact of numeracy, and this is that legacy element, wider transferable skills can allow people to move into those areas that are seen as possibly in the future and out of reach, where we've got significant vacancies, which with a bit of nudging and a bit of control could allow people to move into those sectors. So we'll be looking for those type of engagement events in order to do that. So people will develop their numeracy by engaging in workshops with a named employer that are on there, or interacting with a maths related puzzle on a stand. but something that will say, oh, well, I didn't realize I did actually have those skills, and the bit that's missing is this. And if I engaged in this training, I know I can get there, and I'll engage in this training by going to provider X, Y, Z, or a wraparound opportunity. So that's what we're trying to do in that particular space. And again, be mindful that all of these initials are our best stab at how we can spend the money in year one, because spending the money in year one is absolutely vital. But we don't just want to throw the money away. What we want is that to have that real legacy that benefits the whole skills sector and the wider sector as well, and wider community opportunities through what we're trying to do. So we're doing things for the right reasons, but we're doing it in a calculated way so that year 2 and 3 can be even better and be led by a partnership of organisations that have successfully delivered in year 1, and we can use that learning to move forward. I'll get on to the next one, please. So this one, as I've said, is where we're having to tread to an extent carefully around the funding rules around community learning and family learning, because this is about courses for parents wanting to increase their numeracy skills in order to help their children and help with their own progression. As I've said repeatedly, those individuals who are most in need of our support, so those on low wage and low skills, are less likely to engage in training. But if we can provide a way of getting them engaged in something, learning potentially through stealth, that benefits them, then we can help to move them forwards. So one of the ways of doing that, and one of the underlying principles really of a lot of aspects of family learning, is if you say, well, I can help my son or daughter to achieve their maths GCSE, or to understand what they're doing at school so I can help them at home, you're developing your own skills as well at the same time. So it provides us with a way of overcoming what is a barrier to that individual. So what we're going to try and do is work closely with schools of all types, developing a cost of living linked numeracy program that helps develop parents and families' use of number appropriate to the key stage of the school, not massive amounts of time, 2 hours a week top. So again, mindful that people have an awful lot to do and are struggling, juggling so many things at the moment. We'll look at different intervention lengths dependent upon school level and school type. And we'll look to identify opportunities that those schools themselves have developed that indicate how best to engage with their parents. So we'll piggyback on those opportunities. So some initiatives could last longer, others we will have to share practice, but that's the approach that we're looking to take. So by utilising cost of living and support your child to develop better, we think we might be able to engage more people with the multiply initiatives. Okay, on to the next slide, please. Numerous activities, courses or provision developed in partnership with community organisations and other partners aimed at engaging the hardest to reach learners. And as I've said, some of those hardest to reach, and within the government definition of hardest to reach, are in some ways easier to reach because they have a wraparound support network already in place from partners within the community and voluntary sector. Through other agencies that are working with them, we can find inroads into those groups. But equally, our hardest to reach are those people who aren't looking in the direction of any training at all at the moment. So there's we've stretched that definition of hardest to reach. So yes, absolutely. If you are a VCS organisation, you've got a community group that you really feel would benefit from training in terms of numeracy, we're not going to say, no, go away. You've already got funding for that. Now, what we'll look to do is complement that and support that and hope to spread that model out. But equally, what we're looking to do is look at innovative ways to engage, look at partners who aren't currently engaging, but equally look at organisations that might not previously have been accessing any training at all. So places where people come together is our definition of community organisations. So it could well be a local scout group. It could well be a local football team, to take something up in the headlines. It might be an organisation that comes together and has a group of people, and that group of people would benefit from numeracy. So we'll look to piggyback that as an opportunity. What we're looking to do, though, is develop, nicking an idea from Jamie Oliver in Barnsley all those years ago about passing it on. So people who've had a positive experience of learning, so maybe engaged in a multiply initiative earlier on and then have had a positive outcome as a result of it, telling their friends and family about it, and themselves gaining a little bit of incentive for doing that. Not massive amounts of money, because we don't want to be wasting that money on incentives, but the opportunity is there for incentives. So let's incentivize people who pass on that positive message and somebody else then engages in it. So development of pass it on resources we're particularly keen on, and incentivizing that achievement of that pass it on message we're keen to do. We'll also be looking at provisioning communities that combines use of number with health and well-being initiatives. So it could be about healthy eating, it could be about healthy meal prep. Again, sure, bite-sized interventions, 3-hour top interventions that would be difficult to fund through any other mechanism, that enables people across the partnership to share their experience of what their groups need, but also to find new ways of engaging people with the use of number in line with the outputs that are required in order for us to secure that funding. Next slide, please. So additional relevant maths modules embedded into other vocational courses. We have some learners who have stepped onto that learning journey already, possibly undertaking entry 3 level 1 introduction to particular sectors. They will really benefit from additional maths alongside it, but may be terrified at the thought of doing maths. However, by providing the funding to maybe add on an extra week in a part-time course, or an extra half hour within a delivery session where maths in context can be delivered, we've seen that, and the national statistics suggest that people respond better when they understand maths in context than just general maths, might enable more people to engage. So this will be about providers currently delivering programs with a vocational aim, who will get opportunities to say, okay, we know that on this course, and whatever it is, and you know, you'd have to indicate that in your request for funding, but on this course, 8 out of 10 learners will not have a maths qualification, and they will need that to progress into the sector. So we will provide the money for you to extend your guided learning hours, or the amount of time you're spending with those individuals, in order for them to obtain maths alongside it. And I'm not saying full qualifications, because that's funded through the AEB funding streams, but you might get a cohort that you can take yourself and run a functional skills maths course with, as an example, and that's great for you, it's great for the learners, and that's exactly what we want to achieve. So that was the sort of final off menu, if you like, numeracy initiative. If we move on to the next slide, we were allowed to do some things off-piste, and certainly when I was pulling the initial strands and thoughts together, it seemed restrictive to have a list of 9 that were actually 10 interventions, because that might not suit our particular widely different geography, widely different demographics, and might cut off potential innovation. So what we have asked for in our implementation plans is to be able to ring fence things for an innovation fund, a fund that will be managed by the Multiply board, and we'll a little bit later I'll talk about who the Multiply board are, or may be, or who are likely to be. A group of people who will come together to look at project-based ideas and grant fund opportunities for people to undertake activity that develops towards the outcomes that are required for Multiply, but that are not necessarily on that list of interventions. So it will be about putting forward project proposals. This is how we're going to meet the outcomes. This is what we are. And then the board will allocate those funds. What we're hoping is that will allow us further to find these golden thread opportunities of finding ways to engage people that we haven't engaged before. that's going to be really key to unlocking the potential of York and North Yorkshire's residents in terms of their economic contribution, in terms of widening, narrowing the skills gap, lowering the number of vacancies. All of those things require us to engage more people in learning. And if people have got brilliant ideas, but they didn't fit on that menu of interventions, we didn't want to exclude that. So the creation of an innovation fund, and there will be one for York and one for North Yorkshire, people will be able to bid into those funding amounts. So by creating that innovation fund, it'll allow us to gain intelligence on what works that we can then feed back into the partnership for people to try with their own initiatives. But it will also should enable us to support more organisations, which will engage more people to engage in number. So that's that sort of off-piste element that we were talking about. So if we move to the next slide, this is the very high level timeline. And again, this is tiny because it's lifted straight out of the intervention prospectus, but I'll talk you through the key highlights. First and foremost, and most important, and soon to be advertised, is an operations and partnerships manager who will be managing the Multiply Fund on behalf of the local authority and the Multiply board. It's got to move away from me, because in my role, obviously, I've got two significant providers here. I can't lead a provider and be a commissioner. So we need to move that separately. So there will be a separate individual who will manage all of this project at a higher level. We will need a Multiply governance board. So a group of people, a group of key stakeholders who will start to make decisions about, is Multiply delivering what it needs to deliver? Is it accountable? Are we on track for our outcomes? What do we need to do? How can we manage that opportunity? At the moment, this may or may not be the same board that looks after the skills elements of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. We're in those discussions at the moment, and I would be happy to take feedback on that. Not necessarily through the Q&A, but through the Multiply inbox, about who should make up that partnership board. Because, as I've said, it needs to be owned by a partnership. It needs to hold the authorities to account in terms of the spend of the money, and help to shape and ensure the success of the intervention. So we'll be going out to advert fairly soon on the operations manager, hoping to appoint as quickly as possible, 3-year fixed term contract. We'll be looking to recruit the governance board as quickly as possible. If there is a delay in the operations manager position, we will move. I will maintain operations as we start the process, but I'll be accountable to a board. So that should get over the initial stages of the conflict of interest as we move towards that sort of earlier appointment. We'll then have further engagement. This is the first of what I hope will be a series of events as we get closer to understanding how we're going to procure. So it's very difficult to detail the formal procurement arrangements until we've got the grant awarding letter. And the grant awarding letter doesn't come until the intervention plan has been signed off by the Department for Education. So there is a bit of delay in that. Our proposed plan is to grant award as much of this as possible, although there will be some elements of those projects that will naturally be better going out to competitive tender. So, for instance, off the top of my head, and the one that's potentially the most obvious one, is the creation of these micro bite-size online learning chunks with linked to QR codes. That's possibly one that an ed tech company might want to bid for, but equally a larger provider with an ed tech support may want to bid for that sort of opportunity. But competitive tendering, we want to try and avoid, because it just wastes an awful lot of the funding, and there isn't an awful lot of funding about. So we want to grant award as much as possible. So we will have to still undertake due diligence on those partners who undertake, but again, as much light touch as we can, so we're not wasting too much money. We'll then be looking at expressions of interest against a Multiply prospectus, which will be published shortly, that will detail, once we know the procurement, this is how this intervention will be recruited to, this is what we're looking to do. And we'll be looking to commence delivery on the wider projects within that period of time. So August, September, October, with a rollout of most of them as early as November, but hopefully earlier starting on some of them. So the course is designed to help people use numeracy to manage money. There is already partnerships involved. There will be people ready to go with initiatives that, with a little bit of additional funding, could go wider. And those are already within place within the local authorities. There are already groups working with community voluntary sector organisations that we can start to spend this money as early as possible, because the other thing to remember is the first allocation of funding is September to April. So it's a very tight window for us to spend a significant amount of money on the right things with the right outcomes. We'll then look to start doing promotion activity. The national branding and the national push on Multiply will happen post September. So we'll look to duplicate and replicate that and work with that as much as possible. In terms of courses, they're designed increasing confidence with numbers for those looking to do the first steps. Again, these are about key events. So we'll be looking to start the work around organising those initial events for those events to possibly happen within the sort of late winter, early autumn, late autumn, early winter type of time for the first event, but maybe 3 events across the year. We'll be looking at setting up working groups nice and early to set up shared development of resources. We'll be looking to go out to tender for those bite-sized resources and get them ready for rollout as quickly as possible. And we'll be looking to get the finalisation on the board ready as quickly as we can into September, so that people can start to bid into those funds and start things running as quickly as possible. So that's all my initial ramblings on that. So where we are at the moment is, if we go on to the next slide, there is the email address, and I think almost all of you that will have attended this event will have had a response from this email address here. So if you want to listen back, or if you want to reflect, or if you want to go and talk with colleagues and you've then got further questions, then please feel free to bang them through Multiply at northyorkshire.co.uk. But the other time is now. We've now got an hour or more of time available for people to pose questions that you might have that I haven't answered in that prospectus, in that period of time. So please use the Q&A to ask questions, and I will start to respond to them. Anne is working away in the background to pull themes out of those questions. But if you could start to ask those questions now, that would be really useful.
Paul, we've got a question coming through. Do you want me to read that to you?
Yes, please.
This is thinking about reaching people in low wage roles. Are you looking at flexible models of delivery in relation to times of day, and particularly for the seasonal workforce that deliver this during the off season?
Absolutely. We're looking for as many flexible ways as possible to deliver this. So we'll be looking at different times of the day. We'll be looking at resources that can be accessed within 10-minute chunks in mornings. We'll be looking for group sessions, but we'll be looking for as many ways as possible that we can do that. So yes, ultra flexibility is what we're trying to achieve with this, because what Multiply gives us that the current AEB funding doesn't is that opportunity to be ultra flexible and that opportunity to take the risks to see whether they work. So that's why I've said it's a seed bed for everything. So apologies for the pun around seasonal work, but we will try as much as possible to do that.
Thank you. Another one, Paul, we've got, is the funding and bidding opportunities only going to be open to community interest or charity status organisations?
No, it will be much wider than that. So as I've said, what we're keen to do is to get as many organisations who can get to people as we can. So there will be funding available within the lots for FE colleges, for training providers, for charity and voluntary organisations, for other community organisations as well. but they won't necessarily need to have a designated status. We'll need to do due diligence so that we're not, just, funding somebody's holiday to Ibiza. But, we will be looking at as many possible routes to procurement as we possibly can to add to the flexibility of the multiply offer.
Thanks, Paul. When do we aim for year one to start?
We're going to aim for some of the early projects to roll out late September, just because we don't know the date we get the grant award yet. We do know we won't get any indication of it before September. So as soon as possible, we'll look to start rolling out. We have, as I've said, that very tight window of trying to achieve things. We have a very, very tight window of trying to achieve things by April. So we will look to spend as early as possible. But once the national publicity starts to roll, once we've got the branding, once we've got some of these projects, I would imagine the bulk of delivery probably will start in November, but we'll start things late September as much as possible.
Okay. Another one we've got, Paul. You mentioned about community groups, but would you be open to using Multiply to embed these programmes into council commission delivery, so as long as the funding is covering activities outside of the commissioned responsibility, i.e. supported housing, drugs, alcohol, domestic abuse service?
Yes, absolutely. And this is the advantage at the moment of the funding being at authority level. So there will be natural opportunities within the funding of the authorities to supplement and move this money to get things moving as quickly as possible. So the early information, the early use of the project will enable us to do that. So yes, absolutely. But equally, to use those same authority level groups to work with their partners as well, to empower their partners. So as much as pass it on is the message from learner to learner, it will also be from organisation to organisation to say, hold on, there might be some multiply fund. You could use multiply funding to do that project that you've done before. So those advocates of multiply, the authorities and the wider authority groups will be absolutely vital to that. Thank
you. Paul, do we have a date for publication of the invitation to tender? If so, when will that be advertised? We haven't got a date yet. One of the things that's holding that up is around the grant letter. We have to have the actual grant letter that will detail exactly when the money's coming in and the format that the money's going to be coming in to enable us to move forward the tendering processes. So we haven't got a date, but we will communicate that via the expressions of interest today. So those individuals who have got involved so far, we will promote it through that. We will promote it via network groups as well, to providers, community groups. As much as possible, we will publicise it as widely as possible. Thank you. For people looking to give volunteer support to learners, especially to reach people in the rural areas, have you looked at how training can be provided to the volunteers as Skills for Investment is not coming on stream until 2024? And as this is part of the conversation you are having with colleagues working on the skills workstream? Yes,
absolutely. What I want to be able to do, and those of you that have read and this is putting my head of adult learning hat on, is we want to be able to utilise that line of community learning to support volunteers and to support volunteers to engage in this type of activity. So we'll be looking at mobilising that. We will be looking at seeing how we can plug some of the gaps as ESF funding drops off to support some of that activity through existing funding streams within the two services as much as possible. But yes, the discussion through the skills workstream is also about that volunteering initiative and some elements of those being moved forward or not as the flexibilities of UK SPF come on stream.
Thank you. Another one that we've got, when is delivery expected for reaching those hardest to reach who are already engaged with ESF funded services?
As soon as possible. As I've said, we'll be looking to commission as soon as possible. And as long as what we're doing is not duplicating that ESF funding, then we can find an opportunity to utilise multiply funding to achieve some of those outcomes. We'll be looking for people to suggest that as part of that tendering process.
Thank you. I think the next question kind of very similar to that one, Paul. And again, it's talking about the ESFF projects coming to an end. Could this type of one-to-one holistic delivery be something we could continue with, but focusing wholly on the multiply outcomes?
Again, potentially, yes. I mean, we will be utilising a sort of value for money scoring system on people, you know, looking to express project funding. And if we can find a way that we feel we will achieve multiple outcomes through funding that type of activity, then we will look to do that. As I said, that's my view from me in this particular position. As I've said, there will be an operations manager and a board that will ultimately be making that decision, and not me.
Someone just wants to check, by attending today, will they be involved in the communication regarding expressions of interest in the tender process once agreed, and don't have to register separately for that?
Yes, you will be communicated to tell you what the process will be. So there will be a natural extra registration process that has to come part of the due diligence arrangements around procurement, but you will be communicated with to tell you to go and do that and where to do that, as part of the fact that, by virtue of the fact that you've attended this session or have listened to it on a recording, because I've got your email address. So that's why it was really important for me to do that two-stage process in terms of registering for today.
Thank you. Do you have an idea of the split between what you want to deliver in-house versus what you commission out, just so we can deliver money managing courses and prepare the materials, etc.?
There is a sort of expectation that the vast majority of funding will go out, but because of the natural links to activity that we know we can spend, there will be a requirement for in-house. To put a proportion on it is difficult. I would anticipate at this stage probably somewhere in the region of 75% being outwardly commissioned and 25% being delivered in-house, but that's a conservative guess.
Thank you. Can you clarify, Paul, the age that this is applicable to?
Yes, 19 plus. So anybody who is entitled to adult learning funding through the former AEB, so 19 plus, and eligibility arrangements with no upper age limit.
That's it for the questions. There's no more questions coming through.
Okay, fabulous. Hopefully that's a sign that my presentation gave a lot of information, but often there's more questions than answers that pop up afterwards. Please.
Oh, sorry, we just had one more question come through. What is the value of funding per intervention?
It's to give you a quick view. It will vary because there's two separate funding pots. So there's a York funding pot and a North Yorkshire funding pots. If I can just pull those figures together, and again, these aren't hard and fast because they need to be signed off by the Department for Education. But if I can just open them up at the moment, just to give you some sort of indication. So if we take the initial discussions for North Yorkshire around interventions, individuals engaging with short interventions, so the 10 guided learning hour interventions, we're looking at around 280,000. The micro bite-sized chunks work around 90,000. The wider chunk around courses or provision developed in partnership with community organisations, 400,000. About 55,000 for working with schools. The additional work for those already engaged, around 100,000. The pass it on resources, not a significant amount of money in terms of the incentivised money, so really around £12,000 across the 3 years. About 200,000 for the engagement events, the wellbeing initiatives around 300,000, QR codes around 300,000, engagement activities, wider engagement activities, around 300,000. So that gives you the indication for North Yorkshire. For York, similarly, they're the same percentage involvements, but obviously a smaller amount of money within York. So if I just shrink my spreadsheet down, community group interventions around 77,000, micro bite-sized chunks around 25, community voluntary linked organisations around 111,000, parental interventions around 14.5, embedded activity around 27,000, engagement events around 70,000, wellbeing initiatives another 80 to 90,000, QR code activity around 80,000, and other engagement activities around 80,000. So there's a mix of fundings in there, but they're not hard and fast, because some of that will be trialed in year one, and if it doesn't work, we won't do it again in year two, and we'll swing some more money into one of the other interventions. So if there's one intervention that's particularly successful, then we'll swing more money at it. That's the aim. The aim is to spend the money on the things that have the biggest outputs. So we've taken our first stab at how we think it could be best delivered, but it could be then delivered in slightly different ways in year two and year three. So it is very iterative at this stage.
And the last one that I've got on the screen, can this presentation be made available, please?
Yes, it can. So you'll get a copy of the slides along with a copy of the recording of this actual event. So feel free to share that. As I've said, pass it on is really, really important. So if there are organisations that you know could make a real difference in this space, then feel free to pass it on. Feel free to pass on the slides and the recording to them. That's fine by me. I want to be able to capture that information. So if possible, they as individuals need to come back and register with me to be on that list. Are there any geography related targets for funding and outcomes? Not yet. That will be determined by the board. So the board will make those final chunks of differentiation. That's not been set at this stage. Okay, so if there are no further questions, and I see that the attendee count is dropping, then I will call today's event to a close. Thank you for listening. I really hope that we can all start to work together to make a real impact. You know, there's a real opportunity here through the flexibility for us to have an impact on learners who have a maths need, but also a wider impact across the whole skills sector. So hopefully we can start to do that. So again, thank you for listening, and hope to work with you soon.